Lopez and Yakima Valley College for inviting me to be here today to talk about my dad, Tomás Ayala Villanueva. I also want to thank my mom and my brothers and sister and my Theo Jesse for helping me recall memories and other notable events as I put this presentation together. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you my memories of my dad, along with an overview of the injustices he exposed and corrected. First, a disclaimer. Most of my presentation came from my dad's files, his speeches, quotes, notes, and other materials presented today are presented through the lens of Tomás. Of course, all of my dad's accomplishments were not accomplished by him alone. There were always many other people, from farm workers to labor, church, and community peoples, and others who've worked side by side with my dad. That worked side by side with my dad to do the work that he did. And another disclaimer, I've never been able to get through a story about my dad without getting emotional. So if I go off screen or pause for a second, please hang in there with me. I might need a minute to collect myself. I opened the presentation today by referring to you as brothers and sisters. My dad opened every speech he delivered with brothers and sisters, or compañeros y compañeras. We are all part of the solution to the work of eliminating discrimination and racism, and we are all brothers and sisters in the cause. My dad is probably in his early 20s in this picture. It was before he began to actively work in the fight for justice. You know, we've all heard about that age-old debate about what shapes us as a person, our personality and our drive. Is it nature versus nurture? In my dad's case, I would say it's both. My dad's earliest memories of growing up in an industrialized city in Mexico my dad's earliest memories of growing up poor in an industrialized city in Mexico and comparing that experience to that of his experiences being a poor Mexican migrant worker in the United States nurtured his drive to fight against injustice. But we also have this fight in our blood. Fighting for justice and equity goes back at least two generations in the Villanueva family. My grandfather, Celestino, and his brothers grew up during the Mexican Revolution. There were many injustices forced upon the indigenous peoples, and out of those injustices rose the Villistas and others who fought to defend the rights of the indigenous populations. My great uncle, Ignacio Villanueva, became one of the Villista soldiers to rally against the Mexican government. Uncle Ignacio was killed by a firing squad by the Mexican military. The story goes that the night before he was to be killed, he was offered a bottle of mezcal to dull his senses. Ignacio didn't want to show the effects of a hangover, which for him included shaking, because he didn't want the Mexican soldiers to think that he was afraid, so he refused. He didn't want to give the soldiers the satisfaction of killing somebody who was afraid. My grandmother, Eva Caballero Ayala de Villanueva, was also a community leader and activist. Doña Eva, as I heard many people call her, was frequently sought out for her advice and guidance. One example of activism I'll share is that in the neighborhood where my dad and his family lived in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico, there was a common water well in the neighborhood. The well happened to be located on the property of a wealthy person. This person decided that they wanted to restrict access to this water well and built a concrete block wall around it. When my grandmother learned of this injustice, she quickly got to work, organized the entire neighborhood, and pressured the rurales, or the federal police, to address the problem and tear down the wall. My Tío Ignacio and my abuela fought for the rights and dignity of the poor indigenous peoples in their times. With this legacy, I think the nature argument makes a good case. Now, when my grandparents and father came to the United States as migrant farm workers, they experienced injustice, discrimination, and exploitation. My dad recalls, my family was a poor family. We understood poverty, but we lived in the industrialized city of Monterrey, Nuevo León. They owned a home. The home had water and electricity. But after they signed a contract to work with a labor contractor and came to the United States, They were forced to live in squalid housing, not suitable for pigs, my dad recalled. During their time as migrant farm workers, they experienced wage theft. They were abandoned by their labor contractor after paying for travel from Texas to Ohio. And the amount they paid was supposed to cover their travel back to Texas, but the contractor abandoned them as soon as they arrived in Ohio. In an intended autobiography, my father recalls, in 1956, our family was left abandoned by a labor contractor in a remote labor camp 2 miles from Pandora, Ohio. At the time, we had no car, no one in the family spoke English, the cabins had no water and no electricity, something to which we were not accustomed. Later in the same year, while living in a larger labor camp in the outskirts of Ottawa, Ohio, my dad had his first major run-in with racism. He and 4 other young Mexican kids attempted to attend a local high school football game. They were denied entrance and told no Mexicans allowed. This early experience with racism had a profound impact on my father. My brother Gabe recalls that although he began playing football in middle school and continued playing through high school, including making it to state, it wasn't until halfway through his senior year of high school that my dad was able to process his fear and emotions to be able to attend his games. My dad goes on to say in his intended autobiography, as we traveled from state to state, it was difficult for me to accept how no matter in which state or which crop we were harvesting, our pay was always less than what was promised. More difficult to accept was the fact that whenever the pay or work practice was questioned, the response from the contractor or supervisor was always the same. If you don't like it, go someplace else. This photo on the screen is my grandfather in the middle, my grandfather Celestino in the middle. To the left of him is my tío Alfonso, and to the right here is my dad, and my aunt Genoveva here on the far right. My dad's about 16 in this picture. I think it kind of looks like they're about to drop the biggest rap album of the year. One of my favorite pictures. In 1959, my dad began to work for the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railway Company. His experiences here proved to be very formative in his life. This photo is of my dad driving the heavy equipment vehicle he was assigned when he was promoted to heavy equipment operator with the railroad. He was promoted soon after he began working at the railroad. And this is a funny story that illustrates my dad's confidence, and this is the confidence that he exhibited throughout his career in life. When my dad began working for the railroad, he didn't speak any English, but when we heard about this opportunity for a promotion, for more pay as a heavy equipment operator, he worked with his buddies, his coworkers, and learned enough English to apply for this promotion. So he goes to the supervisor and says that he wants to apply for the position. And the supervisor asks if he has any experience with heavy equipment. My dad said that he did. He was given the promotion. Little did the supervisor know that the experience my dad was referencing was limited to watching the heavy equipment operators operate their vehicles. So the following week, my dad begins his new job, and he is trying to figure out how to turn this thing on. And one of his coworkers who was a heavy equipment operator kind of walked by and asked if he needed help. And so he managed to show my dad how to get the machine started and how to use it. And so my dad got a good day of working, but realized he didn't know how to turn the machine off. And so he ended up running over a couple of fence posts, but eventually he figured out how to turn off the equipment here and became a very expert heavy equipment operator. As I reflect on my dad's accomplishments, I think that this experience taught him that he can figure out how to do anything, even if he has no idea where to start. Another really impactful experience that he had at the railroad was this guy, John, that he met. John had worked for the railroad for 50 years. He had sustained an injury at work and was, as a result of his injury, was not able to work anymore. The railroad company gave him a small house to live in. But over time, the railroad boss decided they didn't want John living there anymore. And they tried and tried and tried to get John to leave, and John refused. So my dad's supervisor asked my dad to knock down John's house, and my dad refused. But John told my dad, he says, Tom, if you don't do it, you're going to lose your job, and there's going to be someone right behind you that is going to do it. And I really would prefer it to be you. So my dad very reluctantly got in his tractor and knocked down John's house. After he did that, he was devastated. He had taken away a home from someone who had dedicated their life to their employer. This person had no other options, had no other housing, had no family. And so after that happened, my dad swore he would never do anything against his conscience again. And soon after that experience, he left that job. So this experience sparked a drive in my dad to not ever allow anyone to go without a safe place to rest their head at night. Over the years, I recall that my parents, my dad and mom, opened our home to many people who didn't have a home to go to. Some people stayed a few days, a few weeks, others a few months. And often there were the people that my dad brought home were strangers. I remember there was a couple of people that he'd met at the grocery store asking for money, and he said, hey, if you need a place to stay, our home is open. And that was often occurrence that happened in our home. It was not unusual to have a stranger living in our home, and it was not anything that anything bad ever happened. It was just always a very positive experience for my dad and our family. It was his way, I think, of making up for that experience with knocking down John's house. So these formative experiences nurtured my dad to dedicate his life toward fighting injustice and discrimination. These experiences paved the way for his lifelong dedication to improving the lives of workers. In response to a question on a written application form, my dad said, the question is, what motivates you to be a community activist? And my dad said, I love humanity, but I hate injustice. In these simple words, that is what motivates me to do what I do. So my dad left the railroad. He attended Yakima Valley College, Yakima Valley Community College in those times, with the intention of eventually studying medicine at the University of Washington. He held a few different jobs, including working at the Chinook Hotel. He sold typewriters, did a lot of different things before his first foray into working with the community. He took a job with the Office of Economic Opportunity as a community organizer for a program called Operation Grassroots. He thought it would be an opportunity to do something positive for his community, but he quickly realized that the program was really only interested in learning what the needs of the people were, and not necessarily interested in providing support and resources to empower the people. And it was around this time that he heard about Cesar Chavez, and he, along with his friend that he had met at Yakima Valley College, Lube Gamboa, drove to Delano, California to meet Cesar Chavez. And in this next slide is a short clip. We'll hear directly from my dad talking about this experience of traveling to California and meeting Cesar Chavez.
At the same time, we started hearing a lot about Cesar Chavez and the National Farmworkers Association out of California. A lot of what we were hearing through the news media was negative. It was about this power-hungry Mexican, about this communist, that Lupe and I decided to take time off and really go and visit and find out what this man, Cesar Chavez, was all about. So we left. We went to California, to Delano, and after asking directions all over, we finally found the place. We expected a nice office, I mean, this guy that was already known nationally expecting to be in a nice office. Well, I ended up in an old rundown neighborhood, rundown house. That was his office. We walked in there and asked for him, and he came out himself, real humble way, introduced us, says, Cesar Chavez, what can I do for you boys, and Lupe and I explained him as well, we come from the state of Washington. We have heard a lot about you, but, we like to, all we hear is from the news media. We'd like to hear from you. What is what you and Farmworkers are doing in the state of California? And he says, if you guys want to know about what I'm doing and what we are doing here, why don't you, instead of me telling you, why don't you just stay and work with me for a couple of weeks? Anyways, it was a pretty exciting thing. At the same time, we started hearing a lot about.
All right, let me try to. Oops. Get back here. Okay, so I love watching those videos of my dad. There's quite a few other videos, so if you're interested, you can look at this. Yeah, I have a note at the very end of this presentation that has a slide that shows how you can find these videos and listen to the rest of them. So after my dad met Cesar Chavez, and he was inspired by the work that he'd done. The United Farmworkers in California had a co-op that it was a grocery co-op and a gas co-op, and my dad saw the impact that had. And so when he came back from meeting Cesar Chavez and spending 2 weeks with him and working with him, he dreamt up the idea of opening a co-op in the Yakima Valley in Toppenish. So he decided to quit his job at the Office of Economic Opportunity and founded the United Farmworkers Co-op and Service Center. The co-op was funded through $5 shares invested by its farm worker membership. The co-op was intended to be a tool. It was a means to reach the masses of workers through a threefold program: economic, educational, and cultural. It was only through empowering the farm worker community that the injustices could be corrected. The co-op would not only provide affordable groceries, it would also offer educational programs and advocacy services for its membership. In a couple of months, the co-op had enough money to open a small grocery store, and they immediately got to work representing workers and putting pressures on state agencies such as the Department of Social Health Services, Employment Security and Labor and Industries to live up to the services guaranteed by the state. The co-op also established the first non-governmental legal services program. Later, the service center, the co-op expanded to include the service center. It included a large community and meeting room, and it was in the community and meeting room that my dad met my mom. My mother was also a migrant farm worker that had settled in the Yakima Valley. She too had experienced discrimination and racism. She recalls a time when my grandfather, Carmen Perez, was shorted pay by his employer. My grandfather knew what was owed to him and took his case to his employer. And when his employer refused to acknowledge and correct what he did, my grandfather, who only spoke Spanish, they somehow figured out how to take his employer to court. My mother was a courtroom interpreter at 9 years old. My grandfather won the case and received his compensation. So it was during a community meeting that my mom heard my dad, was impressed with what he had to say. And she recalls that although she was impressed with my dad, she didn't like him as boyfriend material. My grandparents, however, had a different plan. They never let my mom date, even though she was 21 at the time, but they liked my dad very much. And when he expressed interest, they allowed her to go on a date with him. And 3 months later, they were married. And then my oldest brother was born at 9 months after that. In the late 1960s, my dad learned about this thing called the Migrant Health Act. He began to do research and found that Yakima County was receiving a migrant health grant administered by the health district. The grant was only about $30,000, and about half of that $30,000 was returned unspent each year. So my dad decided that he should apply for the funds to give control of healthcare to migrant workers to the workers themselves. There was a major backlash once word got out that my dad intended to apply for the funds. The ignorance and racism that spewed forth was intense. In a letter to the editor, printed at the time, reads, why $359,000 should be given over the protest of doctors, dentists, county health department, taxpayers, etc., to build a country club for the Mexicans in Toppenish. Will it take another Boston Tea Party to get the message to the HEW politicians? Let's go back to the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. I've often wondered which people the writer is referencing. HEW back then was it's now the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services. My dad knew that he was doing the right thing, so he continued moving forward with his plans. He spent countless days and nights writing the grant. Before final submission of the grant, he was asked to take the plan to the county commissioners as a courtesy. By that time, my dad was raising hell, those were his words, and the county commissioners hated him. They, however, agreed to put my dad on the agenda for their next meeting. But when it was my dad's turn to speak, the commissioner said, "You can make your presentation, Tomás, but you should understand we're not supporting anything and we're not even going to listen to what you have to say." With that warm introduction, my dad said, "Well, in that case, there's no sense in wasting my time speaking," and he left the meeting. By this time, however, my dad had developed strong relationships with key Congress people and other critical stakeholders in Washington, D.C. He received confirmation that his grant proposal was approved and that he would be receiving $359,000 to start his health center. As a formality, however, he was required to hold a hearing before making use of this grant award public. During the hearing, concerns that many concerns and questions were expressed. One concern was that the clinic was strictly for Mexicans. My dad had anticipated that concern and had arranged for white, Native American, and Black agricultural workers to attend in support of the health center. Those concerns were quickly dispelled. Another question was raised: how could a bunch of Mexicans, farm workers, run a health center? To which my dad replied, "Well, who runs the health department? The mayors of the cities do. Do they have any medical background? No. That's why they have a medical director. Do you think we're going to be the ones writing prescriptions and doing medical screenings of people? We also intend to hire our own professionals." Then the largest grower in the area, who was in attendance, stood up and screamed, "Farm workers don't need a medical clinic. They have good, strong backs. All they need is a box of aspirins." And my dad, who always found an opportunity to infuse humor in tense situations, turned to his family doctor who was in attendance and said, "Hey, doctor, I didn't know that's all you were giving my family and charging us so much for." To which the doctor replied, "Oh no, that's not the way it is, Tomás." And with that, the debate ended. The health center opened and provided medical, dental, and optometry services. The clinic was governed by a farm worker board of directors. Hundreds of farm workers had participated in giving input and electing their own representatives to the board of directors. Today, the Farm Workers Clinic, while under a different umbrella, continues to serve the community with nearly 2,000 employees and providing care to almost 200,000 patients across Washington and Oregon. Now, in the middle of all of this activism and all of this progress, our family grew. My brothers, Gabriel and Ismael, were born in 1971 and 1973. The twins were born in 1977, and I came a year later in 1978. And my sister Cristina came much later in 1989. My dad and my family sacrificed a lot for the movement. Most of my dad's work was unpaid or low paid. And my dad was frequently gone, attending strikes, traveling to and from meetings, lobbying in Olympia or Washington, D.C. My dad never hesitated to bring us along to any strike or meeting. We have a picture of my sister with Governor Locke in his office. And in fact, my earliest childhood memory is being on a picket line with my dad. It must have been 5 or 6. And at the end of the day, we were driving home. And I remember asking my dad if we won. I thought it was just you show up, you pick it, and someone wins and someone loses. My dad chuckled and said, "No, Mija, we need to keep fighting." We all understood, though, that although my dad was gone a lot, we understood that my dad was making a difference. He was out making an impact on our community. We understood that he was working towards something bigger than our family. Although my dad was gone a lot, when he was present, he was present. Whether it was taking us along to his meetings, driving to Olympia. My siblings and I all recall driving to Olympia with my dad, and my dad writing his speeches while he's driving down I-90. And he wrote perfectly on the lines. We always wondered how he did that. At home, we always had a large vegetable garden and farm animals, and my dad's work ethic was just incredible. It seemed that he never got tired. As I mentioned, my dad rarely got paid, and if he did, it was often through a barter system. My brothers and I recall that we were the first in our school, in our school friends, group of school friends that had a computer at home. And it wasn't that we could afford to buy one, it was that my dad was paid in an old computer that month. My parents always managed to provide for us, though. My dad was a journeyman carpenter, and he would often make us our toys. He made us a chessboard one year and taught us all how to play chess. And one Christmas, he made us wooden guns that shot rubber bands. Those were really fun. My brother Ismael recalls getting his first bike one Christmas morning, and he was so excited. He wanted to immediately learn how to ride his bike, and so he went outside in the snow, and my dad went out there with him and spent hours outside helping Ismael learn how to ride his bike. So we never went without. Even when we didn't have food in the house, we had our abuelos, our grandparents that lived down the road. We have numerous tios and tias, uncles and aunts that lived all around us. And we could visit them, and following the Mexican custom of feeding visitors, we would always eat wherever we were visiting. Each of our experiences and relationships with my dad are distinct. I think we all took something different from our dad. Some of us took his love of carpentry and made a career out of that. Others took his affable nature and were successful in that way. And myself, I think I took his drive for justice and continue his work. My dad was always very focused on his family, not just our nuclear family, but his parents and uncles and aunts. And my grandfather Celestino's health took a turn for the worse. My dad recalled my grandfather's dream of starting a family business, a construction company with his sons. And so my dad left the co-op and started Villanueva Enterprises, working with my grandfather Celestino and many of my uncles. And that a business operated for many, many years. My dad was eventually pulled back into the fray, although he never really left. He was always advocating and always lobbying in Olympia. In 1986, the United Farmworkers of Washington State was founded, and my dad was elected president. He formed a successful coalition of agricultural workers, labor lobbyists, church and community advocates to lobby in Olympia by 1990. His work resulted in agricultural workers finally being covered by labor laws such as minimum wage, unemployment benefits, labor, health and safety standards, child labor protection, and some protections against exposure to pesticides. 1989 was a particularly successful year. And in one of my dad's testimonies to the state legislature, he clearly calls out the racial discrimination of the state legislature towards farm workers. For example, while a law ordering sanitation in the workplace was enacted in 1972, the law excluded farm workers. Workers' compensation as well, farm workers were excluded from workers' compensation when that law first went into place, despite the fact that agriculture was the most dangerous, deemed one of the most dangerous professions certainly in Washington State and in the world. The Minimum Wage Act at this point had been enacted 50 years ago. This was in 1989 that my dad wrote this. The Minimum Wage Act enacted 50 years ago it wasn't until 1988 that farm workers were included in the Minimum Wage Act. And the list goes on and on of all of the different ways that the Washington state legislature excluded farm workers from the work they did. He goes on to say in his testimony, by its inaction, the legislature has legislated farm workers to a life of poverty. In closing, my dad tells the legislature that if they fail to act, he will draft a farm workers' Bill of Rights initiative to take it to the people of the state. This testimony was given after the farm workers won the right to a minimum wage, and that was won only through an initiative of the people. As I was doing this research and going through my dad's files and looking at news articles, I was really impacted by the succession of news headlines that followed my dad's testimony. And I'm going to read a few of them. Initiative to boost minimum wage filed. Senate approves minimum wage bill. Farm workers supported at state capitol rally. Brouhaha brewing over farm worker compensation bill. Farm workers fast a second day for a minimum wage bill. House okays farm workers compensation. Farm interests argue jobless benefit bills. Farm workers laud bills hope for more. Washington farm workers claim historic victory. 1989, the best year in the state legislature for Latinos. In an interview, it was in an interview after this historic win that my dad said, the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes us longer. As I read through the news clippings and other information about this historic win, I couldn't help but get caught up in what must have been an emotional roller coaster. The excitement that must have been there at the time I think must have been palpable. The one thing I clearly remember about my dad is that he never hesitated to speak the truth. I think we saw that in the portions of the testimony that I just read. Even if it was going to ruffle feathers, and he did it in a way that was not only direct and truthful, but also respectful. My dad could be in a room full of his enemies, and his presence would command the room. They would listen to every word he said, even if they didn't agree with him or like him. At the end of the speech, they always shook his hand and he shook theirs. My Uncle Jesse recalls a time when my dad was invited to speak in front of the Farm Bureau, a group of growers. My dad was talking about the term justice and the importance of people, farm workers, especially having a fair shake at life. He called out the growers, telling them that their interpretation of justice is actually spelled just us, Justus. He made the point that the growers were mostly interested in justice when it benefited just them, just us. That story and my own experiences, seeing my dad speak, always served as an inspiration to me. We should never be afraid to speak the truth, even if the audience doesn't like what they will hear. Though my dad won many battles during his time as union president, he continued to tirelessly advocate for farm worker rights. Though he successfully lobbied to include farm workers in minimum wage laws, overtime laws were another thing. It wasn't until 2021, just last year, when farm workers were covered by overtime laws. I'm going to share a short clip of Governor Inslee speaking last year, sharing a little bit about the impact that my dad has had even today.
And I have long believed that the group of people who work in the agricultural industry are some of the
I'm sure it'll play in just a second.
work in the agricultural that the group of people who work in the agricultural industry are some, and long believed that the group of people who work in the agricultural industry are some of the least appreciated but most deserving of appreciation in our beautiful community. And I have long believed that they should enjoy the same fruits of legal protection as any other workers in the state of Washington. When I first worked in the state legislature in 1989, I voted for a bill to extend additional protections to farm workers. And I look at this bill today as not a culmination, but another step in a quarter-century journey to help farm working communities as they deserve help. And I really do believe the Yakima Valley is a beautiful place, not just because of the sunshine, not just because of the apple blossom, not just because of the stunning views of Mount Adams, but because today it's coated with the beauty of justice. And justice itself is a beautiful thing. And we are extending the fruits of justice today in the state of Washington and leading the country in the arc of the moral universe. This is one more step in the long arc of the moral universe to bring a more equitable society to our nation. And I'm very proud that that's happening in the Yakima Valley. Now, a lot of people have been involved in this journey for many decades, but I'm going to name this bill the Tomás Villanueva Overtime Protection Bill. And the reason is Tomás is a person who came here in 1958 and was such a heart of the Yakima Valley, of dedicating a lifetime to farm worker protections and the health of these communities. And he was always a personal hero of mine. In every meeting in this hall, as a young legislator to a middle-aged congressman to a senior governor, I've always been inspired by Tomás. And I think his spirit is in this hall today. So I hope, and
I was very moved to see when Governor Inslee named the farm workers overtime bill in honor of my father. It was very touching. Let's see, my dad eventually left the United Farm Workers of Washington State to pursue a position with a regular paycheck and benefits. So he began working in 1993 for the Department of Social and Health Services as a community liaison. My dad saw that the state was lacking in providing information and benefits to which the farm workers and other communities were eligible. Some of the work he accomplished here was coordinating a multi-agency response to providing food assistance to unemployed farm workers during a major drought. He also spent a significant amount of time in Mattawa, a small agricultural community with the majority farm worker population. He'd received many complaints from the people in Mattawa about a lack of service and a feeling that the daycare providers in the area were being bullied. And so my dad was able to successfully lobby the Department of Social Health Services to open a full-time satellite office in Mattawa to be able to provide services directly to the people. And my dad ended up being a prime witness in a class action lawsuit filed by the daycare providers who felt they were being bullied and discriminated against by the Department of Social and Health Services. You can Google that story to learn more about that. The end result was that DSHS settled. The case was settled in favor of the daycare workers, and DSHS was required to pay $1.7 million to the childcare workers there. In spite of the fact that my dad had left the union and began working for the state, many individuals with whom he fought against as union president still had a bone to pick with them. They submitted complaint after complaint about my dad, stating that he was violating the Hatch Act, lobbying while working for the government. And it's quite comical to read through my dad's files, to read the complaints and the responses. My dad knew the law, he knew the requirements and the prohibitions. And for every complaint, there was always clear evidence showing that there was no violation of the Hatch Act. My dad would frequently come home and share the latest complaint over dinner with us, and we'd all have a good chuckle. It was during this time that my family experienced financial stability for the first time. The many neglected house projects finally began to move forward. My dad always dreamt of a Spanish-style hacienda home, and so a major remodeling project started, and our modest home transformed into the house of his dreams. And I was most excited about the fact that we got central heat and air finally. There's so much more that I can share about my dad. I have files and files of his speeches and news clippings and other notes detailing the work that he did. There's so many other areas of work that my dad impacted: child labor, farm worker housing. I wish I had 5 hours to share more about my dad and to share more pictures and stories. But I'll pause there and end on this note that it was so much fun for me to work on this presentation and talk to my brothers and my uncles to get some stories, and I would love to hear more stories. So if you have a story about my dad, feel free to share that with me. My email address is on the screen here. It'll be on the next screen too. So I would love to hear about your stories. I think once at some point, I want to begin working on a biography of my comprehensive biography of my dad. And so I would love to include any stories that you have and that you can share. A couple of references. The art that I used on slide 3 is an artwork called Fusilamiento, which is execution by firing squad by the artist Artemio Rodriguez. The first video I shared is from the University of Washington Seattle Civil Rights and Labor History Project. And this site has several videos of my dad talking about his work. If you're curious to learn more, I really encourage you to Google that and watch those videos. It's really neat to hear my dad talk about his whole story. And I just showed you a really small snippet of all the videos that are on there. And then a couple of the photographs I used are from the Irwin Nash photographs from the WSU archives. So with that, I will want to thank you for your time. Thank you for taking this time to listen and learn about my dad, and would welcome any questions.
Graciela, thank you so much for putting this together. I think as somebody that's interested in the history of your father, I would love to see you to continue that work and make that biography something real that our future students and community members would have an opportunity to know who Tomás was and what he did. And I think it's extremely important that that we do stuff like this, that we continue to do things like this. So thank you for spending the time putting this together and meeting with all your friends and family to get this out to all of us. Thank you so much. If you do have questions for Graciela, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself as well. Graciela, there's some things in the chat right now that are specific to you, thank yous, and that kind of stuff. So check that out if you have an opportunity.
Thank you.
If you have questions, like I said, feel free to go ahead and ask those. We will continue with one other thing. I wanted to share with everybody that there's 2 local artists, one being my wife, who is a photographer as well, has shared with the family in the past a photo that they all, I think, own, and she's going to donate that as well to Yakima Valley College. And I'll just share with everybody what that photo is, and then I'll share one other thing as well. So I'm gonna, so everybody can see here. This is a photo that Berta Lopez took of Tomás years ago, and I remember this day vividly, and I shared that with Graciela as well. This will be going to YVC, and we got together with another local artist, Cristi Tirado, who took that photo and made a piece of artwork that also is going to be housed with the student government. I'm going to share that with you as well. This piece is going to be at YVC along with that photo forever. And a surprise for the family, Cristi made a copy of this for all of Tomás's children, so they'll be getting that as well. And so again, thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and stop share. And if you have questions, feel free. Let me take a look here.
We have one that we would like to share that Beth took. Another one.
That's the one.
Oh yeah.
This is a side one. Another one that same day that she took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
That was very good, Graciela.
Thanks, Mom.
Nice memories. You did really good. I'm glad.
Oh, thank you.
Like you said, there's so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of comments in the chat there. Yes, we are recording today's workshop, and so if you want to share it later, it will be on the YVC website through Diversity Series. And so yeah, Graciela, people are mentioning the work that you did and hearing about the stories. Yeah, and the legacy of your father. Yeah. My goodness. I can listen to these stories all day. And I'm not going to share what's on my mind right now because I won't make it out. I know that. Well, I guess I will share really quick. I knew Tomás and the family through my friendship with the twins, Jaime and Javier. And I knew Tomás in a different light than the activist that he was. I knew him like as dad, right? A dad. And it was always amazing to go and be just around the family and see him do his dad thing, right? Which was very different for me. So thank you for sharing, Graciela, your father's legacy. And as I mentioned before, I hope that more people get to know that legacy. It's important for everybody to know in our community for sure. Anyhow, if there are no questions for Graciela, we will wrap up soon. Graciela, do you have any last comments you'd like to share?
Well, I think I see that someone raised their hand.
Ah, okay. Oh yeah, Carrie, feel free.
Yes. I do not have a question. It's more of a comment. And I did put in the chat too, thank you for sharing your dad with us. And I have always been so impressed with the work of the Farmworkers Clinic and how they've grown. And I remember years ago when our Toppenish Learning Center for YVC was sort of sandwiched in between the farm workers buildings, and they just continued to grow and grow and grow. We finally were like this big and turned our space back over to the Farm Workers Clinic so they could continue to grow and offer more services, and moved into a different space. And that was an honor. That was something that the college wanted to do to make room for more services. And I live out in West Valley. So every day I have the privilege, I will see it as now, of driving by a new birthing center that the Farm Workers Clinic is putting in out there. And it will have even more meaning now, knowing the story and more of the history behind your dad's work. So an amazing legacy that lives on and provides services for so many people that need those services in the Valley. So you have so much to be proud of, and it's an honor to be in this space with you today.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That is really meaningful to hear you say that. It's really been an honor to take this time to speak to you all. Thank you so much for showing up and attending and listening to the stories. It was really fun to go through my dad's files and pull out the different stories and really be inspired to maybe take things further and write write a biography of my dad. There's so much more to share, and so I'm excited to continue that work. So thank you for all of your positive comments, and that is helpful. I've not spoken publicly of my dad before. I usually just get very, very emotional. So I'm kind of proud of myself that I made it through without getting too teary. So thank you all again for attending and for listening and learning about my dad. It means a lot to me and my family.
Graciela, there's a question from Teresa Lopez that says, any chance you would make your father's life as a series of seminars?
Ooh, I think that would be fun. I certainly would be open to that. You know, would have to look at what the right platform is for that. But, you know, there was so much more. My dad did so much in child labor and farm worker housing and, you know, the value that he placed on education. There's so much more to share. So I think certainly that I would be open to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for spending your time with us. Once again, Graciela, thank you for your time and your work that you put into this. It was outstanding. We are going to have the recording for people that would like to share it. It'll be part of the diversity series legacy that we have. And so you can look for that within the next week or so. Thank you so much, Graciela.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I just wanted to recognize Mary Monahan DeWitt, who's the daughter of Dr. Paul Monahan, who was one of the first doctors that worked at the Farmworkers Health Center back then and transitioned to the new Yakima Valley Farmworkers Clinic. So thank you for being here, Mary.
And with the farm workers clap.
Yes, I was gonna do that and I totally forgot. So my dad had a tradition of ending all of his meetings with the Farmworkers clap. So you start out clapping slowly and you progressively clap faster until you end with a full-on regular clap. So if you're here, encourage you to turn your cameras on, unmute yourself. And if you'll join me in a farm workers clap as a send-off. So again, we'll start slow. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have an amazing week. Graciela, thank you once again. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sí se puede.
Sí se puede.
Sí se puede.
Yeah.